Assalamu alaikum, inshallah you're well guys. So today I'm going to speak about situation-based questions, and these often start with what would you do if you found a mistake in last year's working papers? What would you do if you found out a colleague was being paid incorrectly? What would you do if a client wasn't happy with a project that you've been working on? And these questions can be extremely difficult to answer because what would you do? It's very likely that you won't have as much experience or any experience of working in an office environment. So what should you say? First things first, you can't panic. It's very easy to think, I should know this, or I'm not good enough because I don't have the experiences to answer these questions. And these questions are designed to differentiate between those candidates who may worry, they let that worry take over, and then when they're panicking, they say the first things that come into their mind without thinking about it. And often when you do that, you may go off on a tangent and you don't end up answering the question. And then there will be those candidates who don't know the answer to the question, but they'll be more calm and measured. They'll give it their best shot. As an interviewer, when I'm asking these questions, I'm not expecting a perfect answer. So long as someone can provide some good rationale, they can justify their answer, it's logical, it's easy to follow, I'm happy. So say you're in an interview, one of these questions is asked and you're a bit unsure, you need to buy time. How do you go about that? Well, firstly, you could start by speaking slowly. That will give your brain enough time to think of what to say next. Secondly, you could use pauses, but I don't recommend it in this scenario because typically you only pause for effect. And the third way is by using a distraction tactic. So you could say, that's a really tough question. I need to think about it. And then you take a sip of water. By that point, you're giving your brain an extra 5 to 10 seconds to think of what to say next. The one thing I don't recommend is sitting in silence. 1 to 2 seconds is absolutely fine, but not for much longer because silences can be awkward. Even for us interviewers, it can be very awkward, our minds can wander, and if I've got a candidate who's sitting in silence for a long time, I may be thinking, oh, here we go, they're going to panic, they're going to worry, or they don't know what to say. The good thing about these questions is that they are so broad. Your answer doesn't have to be specific. You can provide a bit of an overview without going too much into the detail, and I don't recommend going into the detail because you may want to show off your accounting knowledge and you may say as part of UK GAAP and FRS 102, but if you make a mistake, I may challenge you on that. You may have to end up answering a tougher question. The first part of your answer should be talking about the impact. So if we take the question, what would you do if a client isn't happy with some work that you've delivered? Well, the impact is that the client isn't happy with you, they may not be happy with the firm, and depending on how unhappy they are, you may end up losing that client. What would you do if you found a mistake in last year's working papers? Well, the impact is that the conclusion last year may not be correct. That may mean more work to rectify that error, and it could also impact this year's project as well. What would you do if your manager wanted you to work on additional projects? Well, the impact of that is you get to build more experience, you get to further develop your time management skills, but it could also impact your existing projects because you may not be able to deliver those within the required deadlines. Note guys that in that last example, I spoke about the positive impacts as well, gaining more experience, building your time management skills, because not every question will be a challenge. It could be an opportunity too. Now, if you start your answer by talking about the impact of the situation, you're telling your interviewer straight away, I fully understood the question that you've just asked. Next, it's very likely that the question will give you an opportunity to speak about the organization's values, their goals, their priorities, or some sort of skills. Let's take the client was unhappy question. So it isn't ideal because they won't think highly of me, they may not think highly of PwC, which isn't in line with our priorities because we pride ourselves on delivering excellent levels of customer service. This is where research of the organization's website and the job description is key. You need to have identified 5 to 10 skills, I'd say, to bring out in the interview, and you need to know the organization's priorities inside and out. That's your opening section done. Then you move on to collecting more information because you haven't been given much in the question. So I try and understand why the client isn't happy because it could be for a range of reasons. As an example, it could be because the client expected the project to be delivered in a certain way, or they may have misinterpreted some of the data that's been presented to them. So you've provided some detail around the information that you need, and now you need to explain how you're going to gather that information. So then I'd set up some time to meet with the client, and it's always good to meet in these situations because it gives me an opportunity to further build on my relationship with the client whilst also understanding their concerns. I hope you guys saw what I did there. I spoke about relationship building. Why did I do that? Because it's a key skill, and you should always drop skills in an answer where you can. Before that meeting with the client, I'd also make sure that my line manager is kept up to date, and I'd seek their advice and guidance as well, because in my first year, I'm not going to be an expert, so I'll need my line manager's support. If you have the opportunity, definitely drop that line in, because it shows great awareness. When you're in your first year, you're not going to be a decision maker. Now you may be thinking, hold on a minute, Faizan, no one mentioned first year in the interview question. And you're absolutely right. But remember, the question is broad and you're applying for an early careers role. So it's not wrong to assume that the question is being asked from a first year's perspective. Then the final part of your answer is to provide feedback. So when I'm having that meeting with the client, I'm going to make sure that I pay attention to the detail so I fully understood their concerns. Yes, I did that deliberately again. And then I'd reassure the client that we're going to look into their concerns and come back with a reasonable solution before I go away and provide feedback to my line manager again and seek further guidance on what I should do next to follow up. Now you may have noted that I didn't say that we'd fix the problems or we'd do exactly what the client wants, because sometimes the client can be wrong. As an example, they may not be happy with the outcome of the project, but tough. Those are the results. You can't just change the results because your client isn't happy. Secondly, it may be that there's one member of the team who's not satisfied, but overall management are happy with the results. Remember what I said, the question is broad, so you don't have to be specific. There's many avenues that your answer could go down. Now throughout that answer, I wasn't specific, but I still managed to talk about some skills. I was still able to talk about traits of good customer service by meeting with the client, understanding their concerns, reassuring them. I was able to demonstrate good awareness because I understood that as a first year, I wasn't a decision maker. And I also spoke about keeping management up to date at all times. Honestly, as a line manager, I wouldn't expect anything more from my team. Now, I've already answered the question, what would you do if you found a mistake in last year's audit file? So let's review that answer.
So I think my actions would depend on the type of mistake that I've found. So say if it's a minor documentation point, it probably wouldn't be as big of a risk or have as big of an impact in the current year's audit. Whereas say on the other hand, it's an error in the financial statements, or say we were provided with the wrong evidence to review by the client, I'd expect that to have a much bigger impact. So depending on what I found, I'd probably investigate and try to understand how that error occurred. Was it the fault of a person? Was it something that we've not considered? How far it goes back? Is it impacting just last year or previous years? And once I've done that investigation piece, I'd probably be speaking with a more senior member of staff, so maybe the audit lead or the manager, giving them an understanding of what I found so that they can go away and make a decision, because I appreciate they'd have a much better relationship with the client, understanding with the client, and be more knowledgeable of all the various different accounting and auditing standards. But what I would definitely do is use that opportunity to learn, understand the rationale behind the decision that was taken, and potentially use that and apply that learning to my other audits as well.
Now you can see from my answer, I kept it very high level. I didn't go into the specifics. I didn't even explain what the mistake was. But I explained the impact. I spoke about keeping management up to date. I explained that I'm not the best decision maker in this situation. And I even threw in a skill. I spoke about it being an opportunity to learn. I think I also used questions well to show that the answer depends. Was it a documentation mistake, or is it something that impacts the financials? I think that it was also good because it mixes up the way that I'm answering questions. Instead of speaking constantly in full sentences, I'm also using rhetorical questions. Now in my answer, I didn't cover all the tips that I've mentioned in today's video. So as an example, I didn't speak much about attention to detail and link it back to an organization's values. But I was still speaking for over a minute, so I got a perfectly good answer in. That's the point I want you to take away. Don't aim for a perfect answer. If you aim for 100%, it's very likely that you're going to worry about making a little mistake, which may then lead you on to making major mistakes. Inshallah, I'll leave it there, guys. As always, any questions or queries, please feel free to comment below or message me on Instagram.